All right, let's talk about stuff. Your stuff, my stuff. We're going to dig into a question that seems simple on the surface, but it actually gets to the very heart of how we live. What does it really mean to own something? And what if all our possessions come with strings attached that we never even thought about? So let's just start with this. I want you to think about it for a second. Look at your phone, your keys, the car in your driveway. You call them yours. But are they really yours? Like in a total, no questions asked kind of way? It feels like a simple question, right? But the answer might just change how you see everything.
See, on one hand, you've got what's probably the default setting for most of us in the modern world: absolute ownership. Hey, I bought it, it's mine, end of story, I can do whatever I want with it. But then there's this other, much older idea that your right to own something isn't the end of the story. It's actually the beginning of a responsibility you have to other people.
And that brings us to our first big idea. This ethical framework we're exploring, it absolutely 100% affirms your right to have private property. But, and believe me, this is a huge but, it comes with a major catch. And here it is, plain and simple. In this way of thinking, the right to private property is not absolute. It's a real right, it's a good thing, but it's not the highest right on the list. It actually serves something even more important. So the big question is, what's that more important thing? Well, that higher principle is this really powerful idea that ultimately the goods of the earth are meant for everyone. And once you let that sink in, it completely reframes how you think about everything you possess. It all comes down to this concept of the common good. And what's so fascinating is how specific this definition is. This isn't some vague, feel-good slogan. We're talking about creating the real, actual conditions in society. Things like access to food, a place to live, education, that make it possible for everyone, not just a lucky few, to truly flourish. Man, this quote from St. Ambrose back in the 4th century just stops you in your tracks, doesn't it? He's saying that when you give to someone in desperate need, you're not being generous with your extra stuff. You are literally giving back to them what was already theirs to begin with. Why? Because the earth and all its resources belongs to everyone. It just completely flips our modern ideas about charity on their head. And this is the key takeaway. In this view, we're not absolute owners. We're more like stewards. Think about it like this. You've been hired to manage a huge, beautiful estate. You have the right to live there, to use it, to make decisions. That's possession. But the actual owner has one main rule. Make sure the estate benefits everyone in the community. You don't own it outright, you're managing it for the good of all. Okay, so if we're stewards, how does that actually work in practice? To really get it, we need to break down how this tradition thinks about justice. And it turns out there's more than just one kind. The classic definition of justice is pretty straightforward, right? It's about giving to each person what they are due. It's all about fairness and making sure things are in the right relationship with each other. But what's due to someone really depends on the situation. And that's where these three types come in. First, you've got commutative justice. That's one-on-one stuff. If we make a deal, I hold up my end, you hold up yours. This is where theft becomes such a big deal. It's seen as a truly antisocial act because it shatters that basic individual-to-individual fairness. Then there's distributive justice, which is about how society as a whole shares things, like making sure everyone has access to public parks or a decent education. And finally, social justice is the reverse. It's our duty as individuals to contribute back to society and the common good. They all have to work together. Now, you might be hearing all of this and thinking, it sounds pretty modern, maybe a little radical, but you'd be surprised. This idea is actually ancient, with roots that go back thousands of years. I mean, just look at this history. In ancient Hebrew law, you had these incredible systems built right in. Farmers had to leave the edges of their fields unharvested so the poor could gather food. And then there was the Jubilee year. Every 50 years, there was this massive economic reset where land went back to its original family owners. The earliest Christian communities held property in common. And the same line of thinking continues right into the modern era, directly challenging the way industrial capitalism works. And if you want to find the source code for this entire idea, here it is. This one verse from Leviticus. The land, which really stands for all of creation's resources, doesn't belong to any one person forever. Why? Because ultimately it belongs to God. We're just living here, managing it for a while. This is the bedrock idea that makes any claim of absolute, permanent ownership impossible. So, let's bring it home. What does all this ancient wisdom have to say to us right now in our world?
how does this idea of being a steward even begin to fit into our global economy? Well, you can see right away there's a bit of a tension. A lot of our modern economy is driven by one main goal: maximizing profit for private owners. And look, that system is incredibly good at creating wealth. But the common good isn't automatically part of the equation. Sometimes the relentless pursuit of profit can work directly against the needs of the community or the planet. So this ethical framework throws down a serious challenge. It says you have an obligation to use your wealth to help build up the common good. It says your right to own a thing never trumps another person's basic right to live. It says you can't just hoard wealth that isn't doing any good for anyone. And it demands that workers get paid not just a minimum wage, but a real family wage, enough to actually live and thrive. These aren't just polite suggestions. They're seen as fundamental requirements of justice. Which brings us right back to where we started. But maybe we see it a little differently now. If the whole world and everything in it is meant for everybody, what do you truly own? That's a question worth chewing on.